Israel is in the midst of a major crisis and is experiencing one of the most dramatic weeks in its history. Its government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has attempted to bulldoze through Israel's Knesset several bills that would drastically change the balance of power between the different branches of government in Israel, significantly weakening the country's Supreme Court and giving almost unlimited powers to the governing coalition. This legislation, which Netanyahu's far-right, ultra-religious and ultra-nationalist government has been promoting since early January, has been met with intense opposition in Israel and abroad. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis from across the political, social, and economic spectrum have taken to the streets for 12 straight weeks, demonstrating all over the country against the plan to neuter the judicial system and enfeeble core liberal democratic values. This weekend, 200,000 people protested in Tel Aviv alone, and tens of thousands gathered in other locations in the country. The tensions reached a boiling point in the last few days, after Israel's defense minister, a member of Netanyahu's own Likud party, publicly called on the government to halt the legislation. Thousands of soldiers and officers in the reserve forces have stated that if the legislation passes, they will not show up for duty, including hundreds of combat pilots, cyber and intelligence unit reservists, and veterans of the special forces. The leadership of the military is concerned that the controversy over the divisive legislation could tear apart the security forces. A day after Gallant made his concerns public, Netanyahu fired him from his position as defense minister. Gallant was one of the most experienced and popular ministers in the government. His firing led hundreds of thousands of Israelis to take to the streets in spontaneous demonstrations on Sunday night. This was an unprecedented event in Israeli history. Never before have so many people come out to demonstrate on such short notice. After they blocked main highways across the country for hours, media reports began to surface that Netanyahu has decided to postpone the final vote over the judicial overhaul by several weeks, to an unknown date. Early on Monday morning, Netanyahu was supposed to give a speech to the nation announcing his decision. However, he delayed it again and again, in the face of pressure from some of the most extreme members of his coalition, including far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, to push forward with the overhaul despite the widespread opposition and the fears of a crisis in the military. Netanyahu's son Yair, who is his closest political advisor and an inveterate internet troll with hard right views, has always been completely opposed to backing down and is widely credited with pushing his father away from compromise, no matter the cost. Another factor influencing the conversation is fear of the economic consequences of the judicial overhaul. The governor of the Bank of Israel has warned that passing the legislation could cause major harm to the Israeli economy. Hundreds of economists have issued similar warnings, and so have international credit rating agencies and leading international banks. These concerns led Israel's largest labor union to announce a general strike on Monday, demanding the government to halt the legislation. Leading banks, retailers, and other businesses joined the strike, expressing their own concern over the government's actions. Even if the government delays the vote till the summer Knesset session, that won't be the end of the story. The most important component of the judicial overhaul, a bill giving the government absolute control over the appointment of Supreme Court justices, has already passed its first reading in the Knesset, and if the government will decide to bring it to a final vote, it could do so giving just a few hours' notice. The protest movement realizes how fragile any declared freeze would be, and thus demands a full cancellation of the legislation as a precondition for stopping the protests. Any Netanyahu declaration that falls short of this risks further paralyzing the country. There's another specter stalking Israel, that the radical political divisions in the country will erupt into violence on the streets, triggered by far-right provocateurs explicitly urging violence against pro-democracy protesters and by Likud operatives flooding right-wing social media with a Trump-style Stop the Steal call to defend the results of the last election and the Netanyahu government.